Hello and welcome back to Inside the Pastor Study Podcast. My name is Pastor Jeremy.
And I'm Pastor George.
And we're back. We're here together back in the recording studio, bringing to you some thoughts from our week, from our study. You were on vacation last week. We had an interview.
Vacation? Yeah. It was awesome.
We had a special guest interview, something that I hope that we get to do with some frequency. We have a lot of great people associated with our church who serve in so many different areas. You heard last week from Stephanos, a young man who is on his way to seminary, who serves in a few different areas in the church. Lots of other people who are passionately serving Jesus in a variety of ways that we'd love to interview in the future.
Because they all end up in our study once in a while.
It's true.
Yeah,
they often do. And so they're part of the conversation. And so it was great to have him here last week. But now the original team is back. We're here to continue. And we've been talking about things we wish young pastors knew, things that churches with young pastors should know. But really, this dynamic between a pastor and his congregation. There are a lot of things that are unspoken and unwritten, and they can. It's great when they can be spoken, because then there's when there's good communication, there's more understanding, and there's better relationship. And so that's kind of the idea behind this little arc that we're on right now.
Yeah, I call them the pastor protocols, because it's kind of like they're rules, they're ideas, they're kind of things the way you live, but no one actually ever tells you these things. You don't have a class in seminary that says, here's what you should do to manage your time as far as your personal life is concerned, or here's what you should do to actually operate and run the business that is church, which I just set hair on fire someplace because I used the word business and church, and we're going to talk about that in another week. But those are things that we just don't talk about, and yet they're there, and no one actually teaches you those things, but they should be taught somewhere.
I think as far as long as back as I can remember, you've talked about how if you wrote a book, it might be on this, the things they didn't teach me in seminary.
Yes.
I used to joke early on in student ministry when I was working. I've been working with high school and junior high students for a bit now. And I would joke that the first class that you take in college when you're stepping into student ministry is how to drive a 15 passenger van.
Yeah, exactly.
But there's all those things that you just kind of have to figure out on the fly. They teach you theology in school. They teach you Greek. They teach you Hebrew. They don't teach you church, how to make a church budget.
No, they don't.
They don't. And so, or how to relate to your church, or in a number of different ways. And with you just fresh off vacation, it kind of sparks that conversation. How does a pastor take time off? And this is an important one, because I think unlike so many other professions, as a pastor, there's not like a clock. There's no hourly, like I'm in and now I leave the office and I don't think about it anymore. And that might be the case for some pastors, but at least the model I've had growing up, which is you, and and my practice is like this is just who we are. We are pastors, and it consumes our conversations and our thought patterns all the time. And so, we're sitting around the dinner as a family, we're talking about the church and pastoral things. And so there's no clock, there's no like hourly time that a pastor puts in. There might be office hours, but it gets hard to actually to separate away from the labor of being a pastor and find time for recreation and rest.
So I remember one time we were going through a really hard time, had a hard church, and just a very difficult situation. I remember sitting the three of you down and saying to you in the middle of that hard time that I didn't have a career or a job. We had a way of life. Mm-hmm. And I think that was a totally different perspective. I've actually had conversations with other pastors about this, and they have looked at me almost with anger when I say to them that we're not hired hands. We're not in a career. We're not in a profession. We've entered into a way of life, And because we have a way of life, we don't have a 9 to 5 schedule. There's no such thing as leaving our work at our office because the world is our office. People are, a shepherd doesn't have an office. A shepherd has a flock, and he's always with the flock. And when he puts his flock in the fold overnight, he's thinking about his flock. So that's kind of the way it is with pastoral ministry. And it can be tough to take a vacation.
Yeah. And honestly, it's even tough to take a day off.
Yeah.
And it's so very important to take a day off. And one of the things I've noticed is that all of the things that go wrong in church happen on my Friday day off.
Yeah.
Or they happen while away on vacation.
Yeah.
And it is tricky. And so how does a pastor like build in that day off? It is a biblical concept. We as believers take Sabbath days.
Right.
But the traditional Sabbath day is the one in which, is our peak day of the week.
Yes.
And so how does a pastor then Sabbath and take time off on a weekly basis?
Yeah. And, there's even a biblical foundation for talking about taking a vacation, taking a week off or time off. There's a situation that takes place in the Gospels. Jesus has sent the 12 out. They've gone out 2 by 2 throughout the country. They come back and they're telling Jesus about all of the great things that they have seen and done, and how the demons have come out of people, and they've healed people, and they've proclaimed the kingdom. And Jesus kind of says to them, "Great, let's go on vacation." Which is really crazy, right? And what he does is he takes those 12 guys with him, and they go across the Sea of Galilee, and everybody shows up.
Yeah.
I think one of the things we miss in that whole conversation that Jesus has with the disciples when the crowds have gathered around him across the Sea of Galilee, and Jesus says, "Hey, we need to feed these people," right? He has compassion on them. He has compassion on them because they're on vacation. And these people still showed up. And he says to the disciples, I want to feed these people. And the response of the disciples is, we don't have enough money to feed these people. And I think that their frustration comes, you hear that frustration in their voices because they had taken time away. They had, one of my favorite little statements from this old King James, they had come ye apart and rested a while. And here were all of these people, and they got in their way, and Jesus feeds them anyway to teach the disciples. But then they actually leave the country. They go to Sidon. They go to what we would think of as Phoenicia or Lebanon, and they actually do get a little bit of rest. Jesus does some work, but they get a little bit of rest. But it's just that whole concept of there's a need. When you are pastoring a flock, when you are shepherding a flock of sheep, of believers, there's just this need occasionally. You need to get away, and you need to reinvigorate yourself and your life.
Yeah, and I've tried to build this practice in personally on the weekly basis with that day off, and pastors usually tend to take either a Friday or a Monday off.
Right.
And I've done both depending on the churches I've been in the past, and I'd say I prefer the Friday for some reason.
Yeah.
I think Sunday is such a big day as you begin the week there, and I actually like being in the office on the Monday because it's a chance to just kind of unpack and unwind and work through the things of the church while it's still fresh, like the things, the conversations you've had with people and things you've noticed during the day and people you need to kind of follow up with and process how the sermons went and all that. I like the office, on Mondays.
And it's a good day to do a podcast, too.
It's a great day to do a podcast. Yeah, absolutely. And, and every once in a while there's a holiday on a Monday and you can kind of, you can extend, make a weird holiday weekend because you had to work in the middle of it.
Yeah.
But, I like the Friday off. I prefer that.
Yeah, I do, too. And now I, too, have also had both Fridays and Mondays. And one of the things that used to influence that was if you were the senior pastor, this was back in the day of before cell phones and all of that. If you were the senior pastor, you would get your choice of Friday or Monday. And if you were pastoral staff, you would take whatever was left. So I remember my first church, my senior pastor worked, or he didn't want the Monday, he took Friday. And so I got Monday.
So that there was somebody in the office.
There was somebody in the office all week, that way. These days, that's not as much of a necessity because most of us are tethered to cell phones.
Yeah, people can get a hold of us.
People
if they
can
need
get
to.
a hold of us if we need to. Yeah.
Yeah.
And that probably is something we should talk about: is how does a pastor handle his?
Well, that's the thing. Like, so on my normal day off, there are a couple of things that I have to build in. So I actually just practical tips and tricks, right? Like, so I keep separate email clients. I have an iPhone, and I have like the Apple Mail email folder, and I have a Gmail folder, and my Gmail is my general use email, and I don't actually broadcast that email address all that much to my congregation. People know it, but my official church email goes into my Apple folder, and my everything else kind of goes into that Google folder. And I work really hard to only check my church. I mean, I still check it daily. When I'm in a normal work week, I check it daily. But on a work day, I'm checking that every hour or so. But on my days off, I might check it in the morning, and I'll check it around dinner time, and that's kind of it. Like, just I don't have to go in there to see the rest of my email that I want to know about as I'm paying bills or doing anything else. I can just kind of keep those spaces separate, and that's a piece of that. Just as a practical thing for me on those days off.
Right, and I do something similar. And like with my cell phone, if somebody rings, somebody calls me on my cell phone, I don't actually answer it on Fridays.
See, I'm an older millennial. I don't answer it if anybody calls me. I
Yeah,
just text them back.
yeah, right, exactly. So they'll. I mean, I just let it go to my message system, and then I do that on Sundays too. I mean, Sundays are church days, so I learned a long time ago with. I actually accidentally one time had my cell phone with me at a funeral, and that was back in the day. You know, you can still choose your favorites, right? And so your favorites will ring through even if you're silent. And sure enough, middle of a funeral, one of my favorites, I think it was you.
I think I called you. Yeah, I think it was in college or something.
Yeah. So during a funeral. So from that point on, what I've done is I've actually I don't bring my cell phone with me on Sunday mornings. And what that has turned into is kind of an old Sabbatarian kind of idea, and that isn't actually leave my cell phone on the charger until 5 o'clock on Sunday nights. Mm-hmm. About 5 o'clock, I'll pick up my cell phone, and if you've texted me on a Sunday, I read it. But I can't do that on my day off because quite often my day off is trying to take care of all of the things
that normal people take care of on their days off.
On their days off, exactly.
Yeah, the grocery store and the errands, the honey-do list, all that stuff.
Yeah. So if you ring in on my cell phone during my day off, I usually check it twice a day, noon and usually around 4 o'clock. So it's actually a discipline.
Mm-hmm. It is hard. It's really difficult, honestly.
Yeah, it is, and I think it's a good thing for young guys to learn to put their cell phones away or isolate like you do, isolate your mail and so on. Otherwise those are issues, and you need it. You need to be able to leave the flock in the fold for a day while you recoup and restructure your thinking.
Sure, and it goes back to what we talked about a couple weeks ago. You still have a family, and you still have other obligations outside of your obligations to your ministry. And sometimes you just need to take care of all that stuff.
Yeah.
I live in a town that I don't have trash collection. I take all my stuff to a dump. And so I gotta do the dump run at some point. At some point I need to mow my grass. At some point I need to, I'm training for an Ironman. At some point I have to get those 4 or 5 hour rides in and you need some time to be able to pursue things other than the calling that you have in ministry. And yeah, I'll still, like, on one of those long rides, often I'll have like an earbud in and I'll listen to a podcast about something that's going to help my ministry, because it's a day to re-energize and recoup, and I can do that there. But yeah, it's a day to process and enjoy and get things done that need to be done, to spend time with family that you wouldn't have had otherwise. It's what it is, and you need that. Yeah.
So and then there's vacation time, and vacation time is tough. First of all, a lot of churches, your average person in a church thinks, well, vacation time, so we'll give you 1 week till the first 5 years, and then 2 weeks after 10 years or whatever, and that's actually a very poor structure. Most churches that I know of, right off the bat, will give even a guy fresh out of seminary, they'll give him 4 weeks off. Mm-hmm. And 4 weeks is generally, so just to get you an idea of understanding how you get to 4 weeks right away. The first thing is kind of a historical aspect, and that is that historically, a lot of mainline churches would close for the entire month of August. I've even talked to guys who have told me that the mainline, in a mainline church, that they would close for the month of August, and the pastor would go on unemployment.
Wow.
For 4 weeks. He would be he would just be unemployed for 4 weeks and then rehired by the church in September, which is pretty crazy. But I remember growing up in the era when most of the mainline churches, at least for Sunday school, they would close for the entire month of August. And in our church growing up, the pastor would get the month of August off. So for the 4 weeks in August, you would have guest speakers coming through, and which would be, it might be missionaries, it might be itinerant speakers, evangelists,
one of the elders.
Elders. Yeah. Well, actually, that's a pretty. We've done that here at Marsh, and that's kind of a contemporary thing. You really wouldn't see very many laymen preaching up until maybe the last 30 years.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. So you would just bring in somebody from the outside. Sometimes it would be a guy that was on vacation and in your area, because just pick up.
You pull his pocket sermon out. And
exactly. So just be a pulpit fill.
Yeah.
But pastors would get the month of August off, so you could travel in the month of August, and I think that some of that changed when pastors' wives started working. There was a day not so very long ago. As a matter of fact, so you may remember my pastor growing up came to visit with us about
2
years ago,
yeah.
maybe 3. And what a wonderful guy he is. And he and his wife came and visited, and he was talking about the difficulty of pastoral ministry when I knew him back when I was like 10, 11 years old. And he talked about how his wife couldn't work because the church frowned upon wives working. Which is crazy, and maybe one of these days we'll get into the overuse of the complementarian concept of
the abuse of the complementarian.
It's really the church's abuse of women, which is pretty terrible.
Somebody's ears just perked up.
Yeah, exactly, and we'll have that conversation one of these days.
Yeah,
but his wife couldn't work, but they could still go away for the month of August. Well, that's changed so much. The culture of the United States has changed. Most of us live in 2-income households of some kind, And in that two-income household, you now have to coordinate two very different structured schedules.
Yeah.
Here we are as pastors, we get 4 weeks vacation.
Right, and that's a nightmare in my house because my wife works for a school district in their business office, and their busiest time of the year is my least busy time of the year.
Yeah.
And so the time that would be easiest for me to take a vacation is the time that is most difficult for her to take a vacation.
Right. And she gets
And she gets like 15 days that she has to figure out how to manipulate. And I start off with 4 weeks. And you start to think about like, how does this work for our family? How do we manage all this? And then the added wrinkle to that is the times in which a normal family takes vacation. Like, I can't go away in July because the school district needs her to work.
Right.
And then, I can't go away for a long Christmas holiday because I have to work. Christmas is kind of important in the church.
Yeah.
I can't go away for a long spring break holiday because I have to work because Easter is kind of important for a pastor.
Yeah.
And I can't, like Thanksgiving, awkward. Like you usually do a Thanksgiving Eve service or something along those lines. And so it gets really difficult even to use vacation time to go visit extended family when they would love for you to come visit, because you've got to we've done this where we will do our Christmas Eve service and then put the kids in their PJs, pile into the car, and drive from like 11 p.m. through like the early morning to get to the in-laws in time for Christmas morning.
Right, and that's what a difficulty that I think that's also a difficulty that extended family doesn't quite understand. When you take on the role of pastor, say I remember when I told my mother. My mom was a single mom from the time I was 10. My dad died, and she never remarried. And I remember when I told her that I was going to be a pastor, and she started to cry. And it was a twofold thing. She was proud of me, and she was proud of what was going to happen, but she was also fully embracing the loss of surrendering me and dedicating me to Christ in service, because there is a loss. You mentioned it. We don't get Christmas off. In fact, it's hard to get the month of December off.
Yeah, everything's in December. It's the peak time of year.
Yeah, I mean, we've done some things lately where you might take a week in December, or I might take a week in December because we can platoon the preaching and make sure that the Advent stuff goes on. But, there are Christmas programs and Christmas activities and just all of those things that keep us busy. Easter we're not Lenten in our observations, but still, that month before Easter is just an impossibility. And your family doesn't necessarily get that. Mm-hmm. They're wondering why you can't come for Christmas. And it was tough because now my wife used to teach. So when she was teaching, she taught higher education. So she was in colleges and business schools and so on. And when she would teach, we would have those windows of opportunity, which were like the week after Christmas, mm-hmm. and maybe a couple of weeks in the summertime, mm-hmm. and that was tough to make that schedule. And you just get to a point where you tell family, listen, we can't travel.
Yeah,
you
come to us. We'd love to host you. We can't come to you right now.
Yeah,
we'd love to. We're trying to figure it out, but yeah, it is a huge challenge. And then, so you want to be able to see your family. You also want to be able to just, I realized this, recently, my oldest daughter just turned 10 this week, and that means I have 8 summer vacations left before she goes off to college. And so in those 8 opportunities for family vacation, what are the things that I hope she experiences with us as a family? And so when you start to narrow down from I have 18 years with my kids at home to I have 18 moments that I want to make sure that I can have an impact on their life. That changes things pretty dramatically.
Yeah, yeah.
And so you have to try and figure out how to do that with your kids too. Like, what are those moments that we should share? Where should they be? Like, what do they need to see? What do they need to experience? And man, yeah, that starts to get, you know, a little even more pointed and even more challenging as a dad and a pastor.
Yeah. You know, and as pastors, listen, it's not all tough. You know, we kind of hit on this last week when we were talking that we can manipulate our schedule, right? We can do that block thing, you know, where maybe it's a morning and an evening, or more. We can manipulate our blocks, and because we can manipulate our blocks, also we have more time with our children, and we can actually, as dads, make an impact on our kids that the average person working a 9-to-5 job Monday through Friday doesn't get.
Right.
And it's a blessing. It's a real blessing.
Yeah.
I remember we were in a school district where they were considering going to a year-round school plan. And I remember standing up in front of the school board and saying that first of all, I said that their responsibility to instruct was given to them by me, that I was still responsible for the education of my children. And I told them, you can educate my kids on my behalf, but June, July, and August belong to me for my responsibilities of educating and training my kids. Mm-hmm. And of course we did that. We made a list of places that we thought our children should see, and we traveled. We did a lot of travel.
Yeah. Great experiences. I had a conversation with a student recently. We did a church camping trip, and we were up in Acadia. And one of these students asked me, like, how many, you know, we were talking about national parks, and asked me how many national parks I'd been to. And so we're on this hike, and I just start thinking through it, and I start from like the Northeast and start working my way down. And he's kind of boggled his mind. And so as I'm working through this list of parks I've been to and important places in the United States, I'm like, man, I should actually go and research this and write these things down. So I brought him a list later of like the 30-some places I've been. And you just, you know, wide-eyed, you know, as he heard that. But it was because as a family, you know, we had kind of taken that, we had been proactive about that.
Right. Because it's an education. You know, we saw a vacation with our kids, with you guys, as an opportunity that we had for the education of our children. Yeah. And to have fun and to rest. Absolutely. And your wife jokes about our family vacations. She said,
they'd be stressful for a lot of people.
Yeah, they would be.
Yeah.
They would be.
We have our Excel sheet. We have the things we need to see and do.
Yeah.
It's not necessarily lounge by the pool and wait for it to end kind of stuff. So
Yeah.
Which is how her family was. So it's been, you know, that's one of those, you know, marriage and family dynamic things. There's another podcast too.
Oh boy.
What are some things that you would, you know, everybody, that does lead to a question. Everybody vacations differently.
Yes.
Everybody has different priorities. Some people are definitely like, put me in a beach chair and, you know, call me in a week kind of people. And we are more active on our vacations. But what are some just general principles you would have for really anybody, but particularly for this young pastor family? Like, what are some recommendations you'd have for them as they go and take vacations?
Yeah, so there's two recommendations. The first recommendation is while it used to be that you would get the month of August, my recommendation is space it out. I think that it's a great idea if you have the time and the ability as a pastor to take a week of vacation every 10 weeks. Or every quarter, if you will. You've got 4 quarters, and obviously you're going to run into some issues here if you have a family and you've got and your kids are in school, particularly in the winter and fall. But I think it's a good idea to take a week of vacation every quarter or every 13 weeks, and part of that is, and this is going to sound totally off the wall and crazy. But I think that there is a time in that quarterly vacation when just husband and wife need to sit down and ask the question in a neutral place, how are we doing? It's what I call the mission statement review. I know we've kind of lost that. I think that was a real hot topic in like the 90s. But the whole idea of having a mission statement, having a plan of how you actually accomplish your tasks. And I think that it's good for husbands and wives, at least on a quarterly basis, to take a night, maybe, the kids are asleep, you're on vacation, you're sitting around the campfire, and it's just the opportunity together to say, okay, how are we doing? Here is our mission statement as a husband and wife. Here's our mission statement as a family. Are we accomplishing our task? Are we, so there's the joy of vacation is it's perfect for evaluation, and I think that evaluation should be quarterly. Which, if you're a church leader or a church layman and you're listening to our podcast, that's something that you should be doing as well. But I think that it's important for your pastor to take that time on a quarterly basis to redevelop his family, because remember this very distinctively. Paul says to Timothy that a pastor who can't run his family has no ability to manage a church.
Yeah.
So there's a management issue there. So he needs to make sure that he's managing his family well. I think the second thing that you need to keep in mind in those vacations is go away. Go away. If you decide to do a staycation, you are not taking a vacation, because here's what happens. You decide you're going to hang around the parsonage for the week and just relax. And if you do that, people from your church will figure it out. And the next thing you know, you're involved and you really haven't gotten away from the flock.
Right.
Now, the joy of that is when you get away from the flock, you get perspective, right? It hasn't changed that much, but one of the things that I've discovered in 30 plus years of pastoral ministry is that the first 3 days of a vacation, I'm still focused on church activity and church life. It takes 3 days minimum to just actually leave that part of your life and actually settle down and start enjoying your vacation. But one of the interesting things that happens is maybe day 5 or so, and you know this, I go on vacation and I still call the office, or I'll text you, and because 30 years of doing this, I go on vacation and I can't leave my flock.
Yeah, and I think what I've noticed, this just happened last week on your vacation, but this happens with me also, when you can step back from the daily, I hate to use the word grind, because I really enjoy this. It doesn't grind away at me, but when you step back from the daily effort of pastoral ministry, and give it some space, then that's when you start to process some of those bigger things, or you start to notice something you've been missing. And that's one of the joys and the needs of this vacation time is you actually give your brain the chance to take a breath, and then you just start to notice some things that you may have let slip. And you can get that to mind because you've removed the urgent, and you can now focus on the important.
Right.
And that's why this iterative vacation thing is a great concept, rather than just doing it all in 4 weeks. And I think that happens in the 4-week time too, but then you run into just some challenges throughout the rest of the other 11 months. And one of the things that I've noticed here, we live pretty far north and pretty far east, and so when you get into March here in New England, it's miserable. And I have found now that I am miserable when I get into March or in April, because, it gets dark still at 4 p.m. and it doesn't get light until 7:30 in the morning or later. And it's still cold and it sticks to you, and, you're kind of tired of the winter. And I love winter. I'm a skier. I enjoy it. But you get into those later months of the winter, and here we're still very much winter in March and April.
Yeah, absolutely.
My furnace doesn't stop running until almost June. I need to get away, and I need to find sunshine. Like in this, I noticed this just in my life, 3 or 4 years ago, that I need, for my own personal health and for my family's health, I need to find a place with sunshine that's warm, somewhere in those early spring months, just so that I can move out of this winter funk and try and re-engage. And so it's helpful to just learn some of these things about yourself and then apply them. You have the days, put in the effort to actually use them, and use that for your own personal blessing. And so there's some things that, there are things that we do on these vacations that may be surprising to somebody who's not aware. First and foremost, that I talked about my double email box. I actually take my church email folder and I bury it, so it's not in its normal location on my home screen. I drop it in like a folder that I have to remember where it is, so that I get out of like the unconscious habit of tapping it and looking at it. So that's the first step for me in trying to create some mental space. But the other thing is, I don't often go to church on my vacations.
Yeah, that's something that I don't do either, and I'm sure that there are some people who are now like wide-eyed about that.
Yeah, maybe even some pastors who are, right? But
yeah,
so what I have found, in the times that I have attended church, and I have, obviously, I'm not like sometimes it just makes sense too. But what I found on those times that I do attend church while away on vacation is that I'm not with my normal family. And for me, church is very much about my local family of believers. Yeah. And so I'm having a harder time then engaging in what's happening because I'm away from my family that I worship with. And I spend most of that service just evaluating everything.
Yeah, I do that too.
I think
is hard.
And I hate that. I'm there doing homework. I'm not there worshiping, and it bothers me a little bit.
Yeah,
and it's not to say that I'm not. This is definitely not a legalism issue. This is definitely a freedom issue as a pastor,
right?
And even as a family, if you're a member of a church here and you wrestle with which do we do, make a decision as a family and do it. The Lord is not keeping an attendance roll, and you don't lose heaven points by not attending, and you don't gain heaven points by attending somewhere while you're on vacation. It might be a cool blessing. You might experience something you've never seen before in church, and it might inform the way you do ministry when you return to your home church, and that's wonderful.
I mean, I do that. Yeah. By the way, I have. You talked about the evaluation, right? Yeah. I'll go into another church, and it's I hate to use this concept, but it's a work thing, right? I see what they do right. I see what they do wrong. I make a list of things in my mind of, maybe I should try that at here at Marsh.
Yeah.
And those things do come home with me.
Yeah.
But I'm not, like you said, and I worship. I still worship.
Mm-hmm.
I still enjoy the pastor's message most of the time.
Yeah.
I learned long ago from a missionary that it doesn't matter how bad the man's delivery is, if you are seeking God's direction in that sermon, you will find it.
This is This is like a little tangent, but I remember in college, the university I went to had chapel every day during the week, 5 days a week, right? And as budding Bible students, whatever Bible class we tended to have at 11 o'clock, usually the first 10 minutes of that was all of us really intelligent, well-informed, educated Bible students picking apart the message that we had just heard from somebody who'd been in ministry for 40 years.
Yeah, yeah.
Because we knew better.
Yeah, been there.
And I remember I think I was in a hermeneutics class, which for those of you who don't know is a study of guys named Herman. And we were in Philippians, I think. And Paul is it's I'm a little rusty today, but Paul's addressing these other pastors and preachers, and the statement is like, if they're proclaiming the gospel, it doesn't matter. Like,
right,
let's rejoice in this.
Right,
and that is the case here, right? Like,
right.
If you're underneath somebody else's teaching for a day or a weekend or something, rejoice in the fact that the Lord is being proclaimed, even if it's not in the style you would do it.
Yeah.
And there's something to learn from it for
yeah.
sure.
Come home with something.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yep. So that's the thing, like, just I do while I'm working.
Right.
Like, that's, so when I'm on my vacation time, I'm trying to spend my vacation time with my family. But when I'm home, I don't, thanks to the magic of technology, I don't need to go to these people's churches to learn from them now. I can watch their
true?
sermon.
Yeah.
Or their worship team.
Yeah.
I can tune into a service. I can listen to their podcast.
Yeah.
And, those are some of the things that just I do on a regular basis.
Yeah.
And
yeah.
I enjoy it. So,
Yeah.
yeah, it's tricky. That's definitely a freedom thing.
Right.
As a pastoral family or as a church family, what you do on your vacation, bless the Lord on your vacation.
Right.
And enjoy the Lord and enjoy one another.
Right. Absolutely.
Anything else you build in, or anything else that you would recommend to a young pastor? I thought of something here. How do you manage your flock before you go? How do you set things up so that you can be away on vacation and
Yeah. So one of the things that I will do is I will, with you or with our elders, I will actually compile a list of my most needy sheep. And this sounds morbid, might sound morbid to some, but I'll make a list of folks that I think might die while I'm away. I'll make a list of people who are struggling spiritually and might need to just be checked up on. And I'll communicate that list to you and to our elders and just say, you need to watch these people because, these things could happen. And I honestly, quite a few of them, I'll check in on them. Like the week before I leave, I'll check in on those folks and just say, hey, I'm going away. If you need help, here's the number. And I give them a telephone number, whether it's yours or one of our elders. And I say, here is who you're going to call. If you need help.
Yeah.
And I just, you've got to be prepared for those things. Yeah. And it's hard. It's really hard. Look, I remember the day when you would go on vacation. Yeah, ready for this? I remember days when you would go on vacation as a senior pastor, and you would get a telephone call wherever you were because you always left a telephone number with someone as to where you could be reached. And you would get a call that so-and-so died, and that was the end of your vacation.
Right.
Right, because you had to get home and do the funeral. And, times have changed. Life has changed. The elders here at Marsh, I think, could probably do a funeral.
Mm-hmm. Because sometimes, we are related, and sometimes we actually vacation together, our families. So then they could be engaged. That's probably a unique circumstance.
Right. That's kind of unique with us. And it's true. Once a year, right? Once a year,
yeah.
We as a family, we have a very close family. That our nuclear family is still very close. My daughters-in-law, I think, understand that we as a nuclear family are close. So, once a year, we try to get all 18 of us in one location. Mm-hmm. Actually, twice a year, I think we try to do that. Once is usually here. But we try to get all 18 of us together for a vacation week. So that means that, one of our elders covers the pulpit, and our elders are ready to do a funeral if necessary.
Mm-hmm. But it is one of the luxuries if you're on a church with a pastoral staff, that you're large enough to have another pastor there in the office, so that when you're away, they can handle some of those life events that need to be handled.
Right.
Which is an important,
Right.
If you're a senior pastor, make sure that you're shepherding your associate or your youth pastor or whoever else, they might be totally green and out of seminary, but, prepare them for some of these things well before you say, well, we'll be gone for a week. Good luck.
Yeah.
Psalm 23, if you need it.
Yeah.
And,
yeah.
do some building into them and make sure that they're ready to handle one of those life events, a birth, a death, a hospital call. Do that with them.
Right.
At some point, engage them in the process of preparing a funeral service.
So back in the day when I was a general practitioner,
As in solo pastor?
otherwise known as a solo pastor, yeah, because there's correlations to medicine too here with pastoral ministry, because you have specialists, and you have an entire, if you have a mega church or a larger church, you have an entire team of specialists. It's like your own little HMO. But back in the day when I was just a solo pastor and I wanted to go on vacation, I had a pretty good layman, a pretty good deacon who could actually handle a lot of those things. But I would also call a friend at a local church, within 10, 15 miles, and I would say, I'm going on vacation. If there are any needs, can I have you cover funerals or births or hospital calls or things like that until I get back? Like I said, that back in that day, I actually was in a situation where somebody in my church died. Like I said, that's the end of the vacation. I'd get called back, but I would then leave his name with someone in the church, and that other pastor would cover for me.
Yeah, and kind of bide the time until you could be there if you needed to come back for it.
Yeah.
So it's a complicated thing, and as a church, it's helpful to know some of these things. I feel like hopefully it's an encouragement to you. Your pastor does want to have some time away, and for some people, it's just a revelation to know that your pastor works more than just Sundays.
Yes.
And so that I get that all the time. Like, what do you do the rest of the week? Like, everything, so knowing that your pastor does work a full week in preparation for those Sundays and has other responsibilities. So be aware of when their day off is. If you don't know when your pastor's day off is, shoot an email over to the office and say, hey, I don't actually know. When is the pastor off? Just so you can respect it. And that's the same. Like, I think the majority of us in ministry, if something's going on a Friday that needs our attention, contact us. Like, we love you. We are your shepherd, and we want to care for you. And if there's something that needs our attention, please, by all means, get in touch with us. But also ask the question, can this wait till tomorrow? And if it can, let it wait a day, and then engage us, and we'll be there. But that doesn't mean you can't just talk to us, and we're, this is a fine line. But figure it out. Communicate with your office, communicate with your pastor, find out when their day is, just so you're aware. And then, in that vacation time too, like, know when they're away and know when to, how to communicate if there are needs. Support the guy that comes in to fill the pulpit while the pastor's away.
Yes, please
I think
do
I
that.
remember there was a church you used to be in where when they found out that you weren't there, they just didn't show up.
Yeah, I would actually hide the fact that I was going on vacation.
You wouldn't publish it because you wanted them to still show up that Sunday.
Yeah.
So, still show up to support and encourage the person who is filling the pulpit. You likely, I've noticed this, you likely will be incredibly blessed by that person who fills the pulpit because it's a voice you're not used to hearing and you'll pay attention differently.
Yes.
I remember the church I pastored before I moved up here. Whenever I preached, I would get several people who would come up to me afterward, and it was always so awkward. They would tell me that they preferred my preaching, and I always said to them, "No, you don't. You just aren't used to me. If I was in the pulpit as often as the senior pastor was, you would prefer his teaching." There's just a different voice, and you were blessed by it. Praise God that you were blessed by this different voice. But it's not the case. It's different. So go and listen to the person who's different. You might be more blessed by it because you just have listened differently. So some other things to keep in mind as your pastor enjoys some time off, and let your pastor have some time off, because they will come back re-energized and probably ready to serve even more passionately and powerfully because they've had the chance to recoup.
Yeah, totally.
All right, well, that's all I've got on vacations. We'll come up with other things as we sign off, but we'll just, because this conversation that happens inside the pastor's study happens outside the pastor's podcast studio also all the time. But it's been good that you've been able to be with us today to tune in and hear just a portion of that conversation. If you want to hear stories about Yellowstone, PG's got about 30 of them, and he'll talk your ear off. Find them during the week if you're curious. But thanks for tuning in with us, and we'll see you next time.
Bye now.
You've been listening to Inside the Pastor's Study podcast, hosted by Pastors George and Jeremy Stevens. Cover art by Caitlin Gallagher. Music by Sammy Kay. To find out more about us, head to marshcorner.com.